Good day. My name is Jason Casado of Enlight Software. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar entitled The ROI Benefits of Using Data Center Infrastructure Management. This webinar will focus on case studies of companies and the ROI they receive from using data center infrastructure management to increase efficiency and save money in their data centers. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat box on your screen and we will answer them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and be made available to you within 72 hours. All right, so I'd like to get this show on the road. I'd like to now introduce to you Mark Gatos, CMO of Enlight Software. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Jason. So I want to wish everybody happy Cinco de Mayo. Today is May 5th, and so it is Cinco de Mayo. So make sure you go have a Dos Equis or a Corona today, I guess would be the way to typically celebrate. So today's agenda, first off, I want to thank you all for joining the webinar and spending some time with us today. If you're not familiar with the Enlight webinars, we try and keep them pretty quick. We try and keep the pace pretty rapid because I think we've all been on webinars that were as boring as all heck, and we don't want to do that. So we want to keep the pace pretty fast. You can always go back. We'll be sending a link to the recording, so if something passed by too fast, you can always go back. Or if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. We'll try to get to them at the end. If we don't reach them during the time of the webinar, we assure you we will get back to you via email. So today's agenda, we'll give you a quick introduction to Enlight. Then we'll talk about the value proposition, what we call as data center service management, of which DSIM is the foundation, and we'll talk about that a little bit about. And then we will go into what is the ROI of DSIM. And we'll talk about the 5 ROI buckets, and we'll get to that. And eventually, again, we'll open it up to Q&A. And ROI is sort of an interesting topic, right? And ROI can come from a variety of different directions. We're going to sort of hone in on sort of the 5 main areas. But again, it tends to be an interesting topic, and people define ROI in a lot of different ways, and we'll get to that in just a few slides. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and kick it off. For those of you that are not familiar with Enlight Software, we are one of the 3 leading DSIM providers that's on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for DSIM. We have been doing this for over 10 years. We were the first company with a modern DSIM platform. We are a software company. We sell a software solution to help companies do what we call data center service management, of which DSIM is the foundation, and I'll get into that in just a second. And all these companies you see here are just a sample of some of the customers who use Enlight software, and they come, as you see, from a variety of industries. They're federal government to high tech to travel to consumer products. There's a wide variety of industries, but what they all have in common is they use Enlight to really automate the management of their data centers. And you can say that 99% of the customers who use us or buy us will do an ROI analysis. It's just that's the world we live in today. I think you all know that if you're going to buy a piece of software, there's going to be a chief bean counter, somebody in finance who's going to say, or in procurement who's going to say, what's the ROI of this? What is the expected payback? And so inevitably, in all our new customers and our existing customers, we're constantly doing ROI analysis and showing that the solution pays for itself very rapidly, and then you have ongoing benefits over time. But we'll get into ROI in just a second. First, let's talk about what do we mean by data center service management. Well, data center service management is sort of the next evolution of DSIM. As I said, Enlight's been making DSIM software for over a decade. And so we provide data center infrastructure management at the core of what we do, and that is really about managing infrastructure. But on top of that, we layer workflow capabilities, the ability to manage all the processes within the data center. So think of it as DSIM manages the stuff, the workflows managing the people and the processes who are managing that stuff. And then we provide integration and orchestration to other systems, whether you're tying into BMS and environmental systems, or you're tying into ITSM systems, CMDBs, change management, financial, virtualization. Virtualization integration has been big lately because people want to know what's running on what particular hardware and what particular system. So data center service management sort of brings it all together, right? It allows you to manage the different assets, the different resources within the data center, as well as the processes, and tie into all the systems that you need to manage a data center effectively. And we call this data center service management. So think of DSIM as managing infrastructure. Data center service management is about delivering the service that's within the data center. So why would you care about this? Why is it important? Well, DSIM helps you answer a variety of questions, right? Often, do you have physical capacity for new applications, for new resources? Lately, we're getting a lot of our customers asked, how much does it cost to deliver our service versus AWS? I don't think there's anyone on this call who's not aware that the public cloud is getting a lot of adoption, whether it's Azure, whether it's AWS, whether it's Google. Companies are starting to say, hey, should we run this workload outside of the data center, or should we run it in the data center? And one of the questions they ask is, how much does it cost for us to deliver? It's not the only factor, but obviously cost is an important one. Another question, if you want to migrate to the cloud, a particular service, what servers are supporting that system? And then how do I decommission those servers? What's involved in a particular application? If I've moved the application over to Microsoft Azure, or I've moved it into a co-location space where I'm managing those assets, what resources can I now decommission? So there, again, I'm not going to go through all of these, right? You can answer questions about tech refresh, what applications are running on which virtuals, what applications are at risk of failure. There are a variety of different questions that DSIM helps answer, that if you're just using spreadsheets, it takes a lot longer, and it's a lot harder, and the information tends to be inaccurate. And I always use as an example, we implemented DSIM at a large financial institution in Australia, and they had outsourced their IT to IBM, and the first thing IBM did was an audit of their assets based on the spreadsheets which they were using at the time, and they found that the information in the spreadsheets was more than half wrong. Either the assets were not what they said they were, or the assets were not where they said they were supposed to be. And so when the information is that inaccurate, it is very difficult to do anything in the data center, to do capacity planning, to make changes, to do effective tech refresh, to really head off issues before they come. So DSIM is really about just managing all the infrastructure within the data center. And I use screenshots. You know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you're not familiar or you haven't seen DSIM solutions at a show or online, here's just a sample of some of the screenshots you'll see. I'll be using some of these when we start talking about ROI analysis. But Enlight supports the entire data center lifecycle. We've been doing this, as I said, for years. It's all we do. We don't sell hardware. We don't have a hardware agenda. We don't have other software we sell. But this is what we do. We sell software to help companies manage their data center, to consolidate and to optimize their data center from what we call dock to decom, from when the assets come into the back dock, throughout the entire life cycle, throughout all the different stages of your resources and people, dealing with migrations and consolidations, with audits, with tech refresh, and with the ultimate decommissioning of equipment. So we support the entire data center lifecycle, and so that's where we come into, well, what is the ROI of using DSIM, right? If I implement DSIM software, what are the financial benefits? What are the benefits of using that solution within an organization? And of course, that's going to vary. But first, why don't we define our terms? So ROI is a funny expression because people use it a lot of times in a lot of different ways. But technically what ROI stands for is return on investment. And for those who are familiar with your finance course you took either in high school or in college, it's the first thing they teach you in finance, right, is ROI, which is the return on investment, measures the amount of return on investment relative to the investment's cost, right? And so we have the mathematical here, which is the gain from the investment minus the cost of the investment, divided by the cost of the investment. So it might be an 80% return, it might be a 200% return, whatever it happens to be. But often in the IT world and in the software world, ROI gets almost synonymously used with the word value. What is the value of software? ROI tends to be very specific to a dollar cost. When are we going to have a payback? What is the return on investment? If we invest X amount of dollars, are we going to get that money back and then an additional benefit? And again, that's what sort of the focus of this webinar is on those specific areas that we see ROI. But again, I just want to emphasize to everyone, ROI sometimes means value. I'm trying to stay away from some of the more softer values, which might get put in an ROI analysis, but we're going to sort of focus more on the hard dollars that you can sort of calculate more straightforward, though that will become challenging in some of the different areas. So if you take DSIM, the ROI falls mainly into 5 buckets, 5 main areas, and I'm going to drill into each of these. But at a high level, you have the reduced asset costs, you have reduced resource costs, right? So the costs to maintain those assets, right? Power, cooling, and so forth. You've got reduced time for people to do their jobs and increased agility. That increased agility is getting a little softer, but we'll talk about that. Improved uptime, and then delayed purchases of additional data rooms or data centers or resources that you have to buy. So in general, though this is not exclusive, I mean, we've had some companies buy Nlight software just to become compliant. They needed to be HIPAA compliant, they needed to know where their assets were, and they bought Nlight for that purpose. So there are certainly ROIs for some companies that fall outside these 5 buckets, but in general, these are the 5 buckets we see when we're talking to new customers. And so I'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. So the first 2 are probably the most straightforward and the ones you hear often. And so the first is reduced asset costs. So the whole idea here is, you know, if you're not using a DSIM solution, typically companies are using spreadsheets to manage their data centers. And we have companies as large as literally 40,000 racks using Nlight, but we have companies as small as 25 racks using Nlight. Again, it depends what the driver is of why they want a DSIM solution. But you'll find that if you manage the doc to decom process effectively, you really reduce the number of assets required. Why? Because you're not ending up with stranded resources. You're eliminating zombie servers that are no longer running any application but are taking power, taking space, and are actually assets on the books that you're doing nothing with, right? You can increase your rack density by managing the process more efficiently, right? And again, if you're keeping track of your assets more effectively and all the changes occurring inside the data center, you eliminate these assets, and then you're also eliminating, you know, contracts. You're eliminating having to pay maintenance contracts on assets that are zombie servers, for instance, right? You don't want to pay maintenance contracts on them. You can actually start your contracts, right, your maintenance contracts, when assets go into production. Often a lot of companies will buy, but those assets might sit on the back dock for days, if not months. We had one customer who had servers sitting on the back dock for 6 months, but they were paying maintenance contracts. You can negotiate with your vendors that when they go into production within your DSIM solution, that's when you'll start paying maintenance contracts. And again, you don't want to pay maintenance contracts on assets that are no longer in production, that have been in decommissioning, right? So again, all of this leads to sort of reduced costs of the actual assets, and you really increase the utilization of the systems and the supporting systems within the data center. And I think that's sort of the overall, somebody used the analogy yesterday, it's like defragmentation on your hard drive. You get a more efficient hard drive by making sure that you don't have a fragmentation, in a sense, if that analogy makes sense. And here's just one example of a company, a Fortune 500 IT company, who just, by using DSIM, saves $300,000 a year by reducing the number of assets they have within the data center. So, and That isn't the only benefit they have, but that is occurring year over year over year because they continue to use the system even though they bought it on the first year. So again, this is probably one of the most straightforward, which is just getting the most out of your assets, not making sure you're not paying additional warranties or service contracts on assets that are not actually running. So the second one, which is pretty straightforward also, is reduce resource costs to power the data center, right? So this is not just about the assets, it's about the resources those assets consume. And if you manage the power and cooling within your data center more effectively, you can reap massive savings. So depending on which source you read, the numbers out there say that most data centers spend somewhere between 15 and 40% of their costs on power, on electricity to power systems and to power cooling. And so if you can manage that more effectively, you can really reduce your costs. And so again, not only are you heading off issues by seeing, potential power spikes or heat spikes, but if you have a good quality DSIM with an effective power monitoring and alarming solution like Nlight, you can ultimately begin to start looking at raising the temperature within your data center. And if you can raise the temperature of your data center a few degrees, you reduce the amount of energy required to cool the entire data center. And as a result, you can reduce your energy costs by 15 to 25%. But you can't do this, right? Most companies do the opposite. They turn their data centers into meat warehouses and make them so cold they're almost refrigerating the data center because they're concerned with hotspots and server failures. And that is really because they don't have visibility. Once you have a proper DSIM solution, you begin to see where your hotspots are, if you have any. And when you have full control and full visibility of your power, of your cooling, of your heat map, you can begin to raise the temperature of the data center and thus spend less on cooling and save money because you have full confidence. You can notch it up a couple degrees, see is it having any issue, does the heat map indicate there are any hot spots, and begin to bump it up again to reduce the amount you spend on cooling down your data center. So again, these first two buckets are pretty straightforward. Saving money and increasing the ROI by saving money on the assets you use, and then saving money on the amount of resources you spend to power those assets. The third area is about time and agility. So if assets are a big expense in the data center and power is a big expense, the other third main area is people. The amount of money spent to basically monitor to facilitate operations within the data center is sort of your third main area of expense, right? And so by using a DSIM, you're really reducing the time it takes for people to perform their jobs for a couple reasons. One, you're keeping more accurate information of what's in the data center so people don't have to go and figure out things when they go to a server and find out it's not there. With spreadsheets, that often happens. But with a DSIM, the information is accurate, and additionally, it helps guide them as to what they need to do, right? You're reducing the time it takes for people to perform consolidations and capacity planning because they have all the information at their fingertips. A good solid DSIM solution like Nlight provides workflow capability. So what you're doing there is you're taking and instilling the best practices of how you want things performed. So how you want assets implemented, what systems they need to tie into. And the great thing about a DSIM solution, it will tell the users optimally where the assets should go, what power it should tie into, what network systems those assets should tie into. So it's automating all of that so people can do their jobs more efficiently. And of course, if you're doing audits, when auditors walk in, the first thing they'll say is, hey, the finance department says you have these assets, tell us where they are. And so with a DSIM solution, you know exactly where they are. You generate the report, you show them, they go spot check, they see the assets are where they are, and you reduce the time it takes to perform an audit. Because we all know with auditors, the moment information's not accurate, they dig in that much deeper. And with more accurate data, it makes it easier for anyone who interacts with the data center, not just the facility and the IT people in the data center, but anyone who depends on the data center. So operational folks who might be planning, a new application. It makes it easier for them to plan. It makes it easier for finance to interact with the data center when there's a central system they can generate reports from that then makes their job easier and faster for them to do their job. So you're saving time across not only everybody who's in the data center, but anybody who depends on the data center at all. And lastly, DSIM really is a powerful tool for helping bring facility and IT personnel together. I don't know what the ROI is on that. It's going to be tough to classify to make it easier for people to work together. I'm sure somebody could. I'm sure a Bain analyst could tell you what the ROI is of that. But there are these additional benefits that don't so easily fall under, specific financial benefits. But again, you allow the facility and IT people to work together more efficiently and more happily. So the fourth bucket is improving uptime. And again, it gets more challenging. It really varies to an organization. Uptime to some companies is massively critical and massively valuable. And so it varies depending on the organization. But when you start to begin to have a DSIM, you begin to manage the data center more effectively. You're managing the assets, you're managing the process, you're automating to some degree what people are doing. When you go place an asset, you tell them exactly the punch list of what they need to do. And when you do that, you begin to reduce the number of human errors. People don't hook things up in incorrect ways or into the wrong systems because you've told them explicitly what they are supposed to do. And so by doing so, you're eliminating human errors. And I think most people have heard most outages, most downtimes come from human error, not necessarily from equipment failing, right? When you have better monitoring and alarming, you can head off issues. You can see power surges. You can see hot spots develop. You can get ahead of issues and, again, increase uptime. In the case of Nlyte, we provide power failure simulation. So we can actually allow you to go in and test if you fail a particular system for power, what is the effect to the rest of the systems that are dependent on that particular system. And so with power failure simulation, you can begin to see, do you have redundancy across your power grid to make sure that there's no systems that are at risk because they do not have redundancy. Again, increasing uptime and allowing you to proactively get ahead of these types of issues. Again, back to the consistent workflow. When you make things consistent, this is very ITIL based. When you can programmatically implement a DSIM solution, when you're using software, you can repeat things in a predictable fashion. You can set the best practices of how you want things done across all of your data centers, and by creating a repeatable process, you reduce the risks of downtime, right? And again, the system automatically determines where assets should go based on what the dependencies of those particular assets are. And lastly, a healthy tech refresh process is needed in any data center if you want to make sure you maximize your uptime. And so a DSIM solution like Nlyte will help an organization with their tech refresh process keep on top of that, so you're always making sure you're refreshing those old assets, bringing in less costly, more effective, and more reliable assets. So again, doing that helps you manage the entire process, and it helps improve your overall uptime. And the last bucket I'm going to talk about may not apply to everyone on the call, but it applies to a lot of organizations which are operating at scale. When you begin to use a DSIM, you can begin to defer additional data centers or data rooms or buying additional resources, because when you manage the entire process more effectively, it's again back to that defragmentation analogy used with a hard drive. If a hard drive gets out of control, it becomes fragmented. It's not as effective, and you begin to use resources that are not being used for another purpose. So in a similar fashion, when you use a DSIM solution, you begin to optimize your resources. You free stranded assets. And so in the case here, we had a large network equipment company that implemented DSIM because they were considering doing a new data center build, And what they found was they were able to basically find 25 to 30% resources were being stranded and not used effectively, and they were able to defer the purchase of this data center. They may never build that data center. And so as a result, they were able to save $7.6 million. I mean, this is a unique situation for a larger organization. But again, it's a huge ROI if you can actually go in, implement DSIM, bring back all those resources, make them productive again, and defer the asset purchase that goes into building out a data center and building out all the resources that are on top of the data center. And then I guess, I went through sort of the 5 main buckets. Here are just 2 more examples of more softer ROIs where one particular mid-sized software company implemented Inlight and did so to improve sort of the planning and oversight in their dev and test environment, and then a large security software provider who implemented it really for operational consistency and to really extend their change management from their ITSM system, in this case BMC, into the data centers so they had better visibility of what was going on in their data centers. I'm sort of running out of time here, and I see we've got questions. I want to make sure I get to them all. So in summary, really, data center infrastructure management is the foundation of data center service management. And the benefits, again, there's a wide set of benefits, and it's sort of like I describe it as working out. There are a lot of benefits of going and working out in life, right? You sleep better, better weight, more muscular, you feel better, all these great benefits. But the core 5 for DSIM, the real ROI benefits, are reduced asset costs, reduced resource costs, reduce the time it takes personnel to perform their jobs. You're increasing your uptime, and for those organizations which are operating at scale, you can often defer new data center build-outs or new data rooms by efficiently managing the resources you have today. And again, as I mentioned before, there are a variety of benefits beyond the hard costs, but we did kind of want to keep it focused here on the hard costs. So the last slide I have here before we turn over to Q&A, if you go to Inlight.com and under customers, we have an Inlight ROI infographic, which takes you through some of the different examples I've had in the presentation, as well as some additional ones that will take you through ROI of real-world companies who've gotten benefits implementing DSIM. We also have on the Gartner site, you can see 5 of our customers, Atos, Cisco, TransUnion, Sutter Health, and Verizon, talking about the benefits they've received from using DSIM in their own environments. And lastly, on the Inlight website, on the homepage, you'll see there's a panel for DSIM for Dummies for those who might want to download that book. So we've got 3 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to the questions. Jason, did we get any questions? I think we did.
We did. Thank you very much, Mark, for the overview on the ROI of DCIM. The first question is, how is the software licensed?
Oh, Inlight is licensed by basically the larger the use of Inlight, the more it costs, and it's done by the rack. That's how we price.
Great. So another question is, all these slides have focused on value, but what is the actual ROI for DCIM?
Well, that's good. I didn't actually, that's a great question. So the question is, I focused on sort of value, as I said at the beginning. A lot of people confuse value and ROI. Every company is going to be different, right? And so you take a company that implements Inlight, it all depends how large they are, and it also depends on how, forgive me, out of control their data center might have been, and really how complex the data center is. What we find is with most of our customers, they get a payoff somewhere between 9 months and a year. So what that means is the software pays for itself within the first year, and then they receive the benefit, so it's paid for itself in the first year, and then ongoing as they continue to use the software in year 2, 3, 4, 5. We have some customers who've been using Inlight for over a decade. Because we have a 99% retention rate with customers, those customers are getting a huge ROI because they continue to get the benefit that's paid off in the first 9 to 12 months. We've had some customers tell us it paid for itself in the first 3 months. We've had some customers be able to pass an audit because they were able to have all that information at their fingertips. It's difficult to quantify the value of being able to pass an audit. I will tell you, you'll know how valuable it is when you don't pass it. So again, the ROI does vary what that percentage is depending on the organization. But like I said, we typically see in about a 9-month payoff from customers deploying DSIM, them getting their money back, and then they begin to reap the benefits on to year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Since we're running short on time, I have one more question. What's the ROI of uptime?
Oh, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, it varies depending on the organization. So the example I had, it seemed incredible. I didn't even hit on it during the presentation. The healthcare company there, for them, they were getting data center failures quite often. In fact, it was embarrassing for them. And so we helped minimize that. For them, when the data center was down, literally people could not schedule MRIs. They couldn't schedule X-rays. And what is the value to them? I mean, it really depends on the organization what the value is uptime. Do we have time for one more question? Come on, Jason, one more question.
All right.
We have a bunch to go. I saw we had.
So we have a different DSIM package that sucks. What's the ROI of migrating to nLight?
That's funny. We thank you for the colorful language. So we certainly have a lot of companies, a certain number of customers who come to us, have an existing DSIM solution that hasn't necessarily worked out for them. We're very familiar with this. Again, the specific ROI, what I can tell you is we make customers successful. It's the only thing we do. We don't sell hardware. We don't sell other types of software solutions. This is the only thing we do, and we make our customers successful. So that you can be certain of. The ROI of doing a migration, we have tools that make it very easy to extract the information you have in an existing DSIM solution into ours and get you up and running and be using the industry-leading solution, which we believe nLight is. So the ROI tends to be very positive, but often it's very challenging for companies to come to grips with the fact that their DSIM solution is not working out for them. And again, not all DSIM solutions are the same. So I would strongly urge you to avoid this type of situation. Test the software. Try it out. Have the vendor show it to you in your environment with your data. Because, again, not all DSIM solutions are built the same, and I would strongly urge you to look at scalability, integration, security, and architecture, because you're going to live with the system for what could be years, day in and day out. You want to make sure it has a great architecture so that in the long run, it's easy to use, it can integrate into what you need to, and it's basically flexible. So I hope that was an answer. All right? Thank you, Jason, for the bonus question.
Sure thing.
I think,
yeah, that's the last question we had, Mark. Thank you so much again for your overview on the ROI.
And thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar. Again, we appreciate your time. We did have some additional questions. That's why I wanted to push for at least that one. We did have some additional questions. We guarantee we'll get back to everyone with answers to all your questions.
Great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. And like I mentioned, this webinar will be recorded and sent out to you within 72 hours. Thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day. Have a nice day.
Happy Cinco de Mayo.